Thank you guys for joining the Steel Aces podcast. This is our pilot episode. I'm Brian,
I'm Ron.
and we appreciate you being here with us for episode one. On Still Aces podcast, we're here to discuss comic book movies, the world of comics. We certainly have a love for it, and we just want to talk about what interests us in upcoming movies, shows, and just anything that you guys want us to discuss. We'll certainly take comments about. Um, but I'll start off with me. What got me into the world of comics? For me, it started in the early 90s with X-Men. We got a treat with X-Men 97, which is something I've been waiting for, you know, 25 plus years, almost 30 years. But the X-Men series it was incredible with the sheer amount of characters that existed in that show. Obviously, I found a favorite character that I'll discuss a little bit later. But I just love the issues that the X-Men tackled. And that love carried over into 2000 when we got our first X-Men movie. And the momentum just continued to build, from X-Men 2 in 2003 to, X3 The Last Stand in 2006. So, a little disappointed from that film, but it continued to build on. And then I got a job at a movie theater, during the second Spider-Man 2 with Tobey Maguire, and it just being around that energy, being at midnight shows, and just soaking in all of the electricity from the atmosphere. It was a great time, and those memories just continue to contribute to why I love comics. When the MCU finally came out, being at all of those shows, seeing them multiple times, it reinforced my love for Marvel. What about you, Ron?
So my earliest memories of Marvel was watching an Iron Man VHS tape from the 1960s. Then it turned into Spider-Man, Spider-Man and his amazing friends, still from the same time. And um, my more clearer memories of Marvel that really kicked off my love affair for it was Spider-Man the animated series, then X-Men the animated series in that order. Spider-Man is my all-time favorite character, um, but for X-Men, Gambit, he's that hard number two. I just had a instant love affair with him. You know, his look, his appeal, his smoothness. Um, I just love the way that he carried himself. Of course, there's what I consider the real power couple between him and Rogue. Always had a little bit of a cartoon crush when it came to Rogue, so kind of natural that Gambit would be my favorite character because I was always rooting for those two. Um, and then it just kind of just transitioned into movies because then that's when we were starting to get hit with the Blade movies, then the Spider-Man movies, then the Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk, your different versions of the Punisher movies, and ultimately, we get to the MCU, and I've been waiting for Gambit to be properly represented in an MCU movie. Like I got my Spider-Man, Toby did his thing, and he will always be my number one Spider-Man. Now it's time for Gambit to be properly represented in the live action movie. So I'm hoping in this next wave of Marvel movies because X-Men is going to be coming to the live action again, just represented differently. I'm hoping that he gets his due justice. I'm really hoping just because unfortunately the way that he's been represented up until this point, I personally have not been pleased with. Um, I got a little taste of him in the X-Men 97. It just hit home on why I loved him so much, just in a more modern version. So I'm hoping that what they portrayed of him in X-Men 97, that can be brought over into the live action, and that will quench my thirst for him.
Got it. Now, what would you say, Ron, is your favorite all-time theater experience? Going to see a Marvel movie. What was the one movie that you went and saw, and based off of atmosphere and everything else, that stands out the most?
So I would say Infinity War. Close, close second is Spider-Man: No Way Home. Infinity War, that movie had so much build up. Because you knew what was coming. I mean, what are we talking? Like 12, 13 years of a storyline that finally was being concluded. Thanos, we got to see little bits and pieces of him in certain movies, and that just lets you know that he's coming and he's going to wreck some stuff. And I believe it was Age of Ultron where you saw him put on the glove and he was like, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And I just remember the whole entire theater being like, "Oh shit!" And then it was just you, you just knew. And then when Infinity War got here, it was just a masterpiece. It was a masterpiece for like 2.5 hours, and I remember the theater experience was all in unison. Whatever the reaction was, whether it was happy, whether it was sad, whether it was anger, and when Thanos snapped his finger and everyone just started turning into dust. Everybody was quiet. Everybody was quiet through all of that sequence, and I can actually remember hearing sniffles and cryings. And when Spider Man when Spider Man went away, I actually remember somebody yelling like, "What the f is going on here?" It was just such a surreal moment. And just to briefly talk about No Way Home, that's on a different level just because you brought Toby back and it was kept a secret. You brought Andrew Garfield back. It was kept a secret. And when people saw them for the first time, like the whole crowd erupted. Like everyone's chanting Toby, 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 Toby's the GOAT. And then when you see Andrew Garfield come on the screen, he got his flowers too.
Yep.
Everybody showed his appreciation. I mean that movie had so many different pulls of 2002 to when Andrew Garfield movies came out. It was you were connecting generations of people of like, hey, I used to watch Toby, hey, I used to watch Andrew, and hey, I used to watch and hey, I watched Tom Holland. So you have all these different age ranges of people watching the same movie and everyone is getting hyped over the exact same thing.
Yep.
So both of them hold special places for me. But if you're asking me to pick what's the number one, then it has to be Infinity War just because there was just so much energy build up.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think, it's hard to compare anything to what Infinity War and Endgame meant, seeing it on the screen. But I'll tell you one moment that does stand out for me.
This is the only thing that I will say. So I gave Infinity War a 9.5. The only reason why that movie did not get a 10 was because the Hulk got punked, and that has not been fixed.
I know. I remember hearing how disappointed you were. You're like, man, the Hulk shouldn't have, got beat up by Thanos like that. And I'm like, he had two stones on him, man. He had the gauntlet. For me, that sequence in X2, again, like I said, when, Colossus, burst through the door after like Siren is in X2 when she's screaming, daughter of Banshee, and she's waking everyone in the entire mansion. The sound in the auditorium was just, it was so loud. And I'm just sitting back in my seat, like, oh my gosh, this is intense. Like, that was such an amazing sequence. And it holds up. I mean, we're talking that was 18 years ago. Like, that scene still, is imprinted in my mind because of how good it was. And I appreciate that movie. For all the things they could have done better, that was one sequence that was just fantastic, and I wouldn't have changed much about that. But I mean, we've got quite a few films that are coming up. Marvel has slowed things down a little bit, and we'll certainly jump into those films. But we just wanted to kind of do a little trial run. Because we have a few more episodes that we'll be releasing back to back for our podcast. But this is episode one. So obviously, any comments that you guys have, any topics that you want us to discuss, any questions you have, make sure you drop that in the comments, and we will certainly respond to all of them and mention them in our videos. Now, Ron, I do want to ask. I know you talked a lot about Gambit. What made Gambit? What makes him your favorite character? Why is he your favorite?
So it's kind of tough because I had such a strong affection for Spider-Man, so he had always held that number one. And when X-Men came out, it wasn't as if I was searching for another character, but it was just I remember watching Night of the Sentinels, the first episode, and my first view of Gambit, and he was hitting on the cashier, getting his cards, and he's just a G to me. He's just a G to me, just extremely smooth. And I always admired and loved the way his powers were projected. And I'm just talking the cartoon in the show. But as I got older, I had started to hear and learn that that's a part of him, but that's not really him. Like Gambit has another side. Like Gambit is that person. He is that mutant. And unfortunately, people just don't know about that just because that hasn't been portrayed in the cartoons. It hasn't been portrayed in the movies. So his character is kind of like an unfinished story, and I'm waiting and I'm hoping to actually see that come to fruition. On the big screen. But basically, to answer your question, is that I was just instantly drawn to him, and it helped that he had a crush on Rogue too. So
No, I get
bonus
that,
points.
and I think everybody that's watching, they're like, you know what? I could tell he cared a lot about the fact that Gambit was smooth because he's laying down in the screen like Tyrese and Baby Boy.
Unfortunately, that's because we're dealing with an extremely low budget. So in the next video, I will be sitting in an actual chair. I will be sitting in a
Hey,
chair.
that's a fact. Absolutely, I'm
So
telling you. For me, you see the Colossus shirt. Colossus has always been my favorite. He's the gentle giant. Big guy with a ton of strength. But he never exerts it to his fullest potential. Even when the X Men, had a mistaken for Juggernaut when they thought he was the bank robber in the earlier X Men, episodes. They tried to attack him, and instead of bashing him to a pulp, he like just kind of threw him off of him, and I just love the fact that the guy is he's incredibly strong. He's somebody you want to have on your team, but he's not a hothead, doesn't lose his temper, and I like that. Peter Rasputin, And if you guys haven't been able to tell yet, that's where we get our podcast name from. Steel Aces comes from the organic steel of Colossus, and the Ace of Spades for Gambit. So you put it together, and that's how we form. But we appreciate you guys joining us on our pilot episode of Still Aces. We have much more to share, much more to come. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can follow us, get notifications as our page grows because we plan on doing this a lot going forward, a lot more going forward. So, again, this is the early stages. We'll get some music. You'll watch this channel grow. There'll be a lot more that we'll add to it. Ron will be able to afford a chair, poor guy, and we'll be in a good spot. But we appreciate you guys joining us on Still Aces, and until next time.